I've been sitting here all day thinking about what constitutes the perfect MMO. After numerous hours contemplating, I've come up with a rather surprising conclusion. Over the course of 2023, following my descent into the gacha genre, shameless plug, I do have a channel dedicated exclusively to this, I've come to the realization that the MMO scene, both the community and studios, have changed drastically since I started content creation. For reference, I started YouTube officially at the beginning of 2017, almost 7 years ago. Back in 2017, Soul Worker and Closers were still Korean exclusives. Blade & Soul and Black Desert Online had just launched globally. Legion was the newest expansion for World of Warcraft. The genre was truly alive, the standards were higher, the products were higher quality. In 2022 and 2023, we received cheap cross-platform MMOs like Tower of Fantasy, Noah's Heart, Ni no Kuni Crossworlds, Undawn, Ashfall, and many of the MMOs on the immediate horizon are either indie games with little to no hope of ever realizing a playable product, or copy-pasta mobile games. With notable exceptions, of course, being games like Blue Protocol, Ashes of Creation, the Riot MMO, and a few others, all of which will launch at some point in 2043. After having played recent releases like Tower of Fantasy, Noah's Heart, Ni no Kuni Crossworlds, The Day Before, Perfect New World, Terrasland, Crystal of Outlaw, Dragon Nest 2, Revelation Mobile, Blade & Soul 2, I've noticed there has been a significant shift over what new MMOs are. They're not games like Blade & Soul or Black Desert Online. They're not games like Rift or Ion. They're games like Genshin Impact. And that is because Genshin Impact has had a significant impact on the gaming genre as a whole. Due to that influence, what many current generation MMO players perceive to be the perfect MMO are very different to what I had envisioned the perfect MMO to be just a mere few years ago, which leads me to an important question. I'm well aware that these opinions don't necessarily reflect every single MMO player's thoughts, so I want you to, before watching this video, leave a comment below with your answer to this question. Is there a perfect MMO? And if there is, what would that perfect MMO look like to you? And I get it, the perfect MMORPG is completely subjective, right? There probably isn't a more controversial topic to cover in the genre than what do you think would make a great game. But I'd like to nevertheless cover it from my perspective and the perspective of many gamers that I've spoken to in the MMO and gacha communities respectively. And I would love to hear your guys' opinions on the topic as well. Before we jump into that, I want to take a moment here to thank my incredible patrons over on Patreon who allow for me to do videos like this every single week. You guys are phenomenal and I cannot thank you all enough. Now let's jump into and see if we can't figure out what the perfect MMO is. After a lot of Googling, scouring Reddit, gaming forums like GameFAQs, social media, and discussions with numerous content creators, I've come to the conclusion that there are two parties with two very differing opinions. On the one hand, there are players that prefer old school MMOs, games like RuneScape, WoW Classic, and more recently Hardcore WoW. That's due to the difficulty, the systems, the community, the multiplayer aspects. Older MMOs had a significant focus on the world and the place that every player had within it. People knew who other people were. There were guilds that were vying for supremacy, trying to siphon players from each other to increase their own power, whether for PvP or just dungeons and raids. The world was filled with content that required the active participation of other players. The opposite is true for newer generation MMO players, which leads me to the other party. The players that prefer games like Genshin Impact, Wuthering Waves, Arknights Enfield, Project Mugen. This is due to the significant focus on narrative, the characters, the gameplay, and single-player aspects. Every game I mentioned is single-player. Every popular upcoming gacha game is single-player, and every upcoming Asian MMO has a substantial focus on single-player over multiplayer. Even WoW and Final Fantasy XIV have begun to adopt the single-player mindset. AI party members in Final Fantasy XIV, so you don't need to rely on other players soloing the entirety of the game. AI followers in dungeons for WoW to fill your group, allowing players to do solo content without needing to group up with real people. New MMOs are dead. They're desolate, lifeless, soulless. They look pretty, they tend to have some good combat, but they're all void of what made older MMOs, well, the MMOs. Well, I don't think this is necessarily going to change. On the contrary, I think that MMOs are slowly becoming single-player games. I do nevertheless have hope for the genre. For a studio to realize that sure, lots of people love Genshin, but there are millions of us waiting for something that truly reinvigorates the multiplayer aspect of an MMO. Every content creator that I've spoken to in the last several months has agreed that they and many of their friends just don't play MMOs anymore. They've migrated on over to games like Valheim, Among Us, V-Rising, multiplayer games that fulfill the need to work with other players for a common goal, whether it's as simple as farming and building or resource management or challenging difficult monolithic world bosses. This is what they and their friends used to love doing in MMOs and what multiplayer games have begun to focus on in recent years, and it works. These games have sold millions of copies and have seen exponential growth. So it stands to reason that this is also possible for an MMO studio to achieve, to replicate. But for a studio to succeed in today's market, it would need to create something very different. It would need to take aspects of both communities and attempt to meld them together into a cohesive mass. But that's easier said than done. But at the same time, what would that look like? Things players love about Genshin, and by extension, gacha games, are the world, the characters, and the story. Gacha games tend to leave you personally invested in the relationships formed with characters in-game. And the waifus, husbandos, they're typically really hot. That's also why Blade and Soul and Black Desert did so well. MMO players and gacha players share similar interests after all. Big booba waifus. So, what the perfect gacha needs is a good story. This has been proven in both Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV. People play them predominantly for their story. It needs a world that you can become invested in, with a reason to explore. Final Fantasy XIV's world is boring. It's pretty, but you have no reason to explore any of it. WoW has gear that you can find, toys that have unique effects, special pets. Guild Wars 2 has points of interest, hero points, dynamic events. Since players in this generation have become so accustomed to multi-character team compositions, what we need is the ability to recruit classes or to swap between classes on the fly, kind of like Final Fantasy XIV, but be able to do it in combat at the click of a button. Atlantica Online had a similar feature to this, allowing you to recruit additional classes that you could deploy in battle. The classes need class stories with personalities. Your character can't be a nameless hero with no personality, or if they are, the classes you can swap to need to possess the personality that you lack. You could be a blank canvas, the base class that can evolve into others. Things players love about older MMOs are the difficulty, the cooperative play, PvP, and meaningful loot. Grinding artifacts in Genshin is boring. Grinding gear in general is kind of boring, if I'm being entirely honest with you. But in games like Classic WoW and Hardcore WoW, every piece of gear is important and can potentially be the difference between life and death. Meaningful gear is integral to a sense of progression and can make difficult encounters slightly less difficult, or fatal. Difficulty is another key focus and absolutely needs to be replicated, yet so often isn't. In today's MMOs, you can run through content, completing quests, taking down epic monsters, all while fapping with one hand and drinking a Coke with another. Yeah, wrap your head around that. There needs to be a reason to group up. Fates in Final Fantasy XIV aren't a reason to group up. World bosses in WoW are, but typically they're a one and done per week kind of deal. It's depressing how solo-friendly MMOs are these days. We need a game that forces you to play with other people outside of dungeons or raids, and we definitely don't want AI party members. Regarding PvP, I have never seen open world PvP balanced, but my god is it fun. Although it isn't for everyone, I don't think I have a solution for a functional PvP system in game that would appease fans of PvP, while also pleasing players that don't want to get ganked. Despite which type of MMO player you are, I think we can all agree on the fact that we need the option for hot characters with an extensive character creator, with all the right sliders, for both males and females. The business model and monetization is also important. Many players would prefer a free game without microtransactions or pay to win, but they're really the only way you can successfully monetize your players as a free game with no reliable source of income. More players can't afford a monthly recurring subscription than those that can, but a monthly fee ensures a game has a long-term budget that allows for them to produce higher quality content at a faster rate. Buy-to-play MMOs tend to transition to free-to-play after a short period because for the most part, a single-time purchase might be good in the short term but provide no reliable long-term financial guarantee. For me, as someone who can afford a subscription fee, I believe pay-to-play is the only way to ensure a certain level of quality, which is what I would opt for. I also believe that the world should be completely open. I'm not overly fond of instance zones or hubs. I want to see that guy running from one zone into the other. I want to chase an enemy faction and hunt them down, or run for my life from them if the opposite is true. I want a world that serves a purpose beyond moving from hub A to hub B. I want a cast of characters that I can become invested in. I want a story that I can become enthralled with. I want a deep, complex class system and the ability to swap between them on the fly. I don't think combat matters. I love both action combat and tab target combat. There are pros and cons to both styles. I want a difficult world that prioritizes group play because you cannot continue without it. I want meaningful gear where every new piece matters, even if it's the difference between 3 HP and 5. I don't care what type of PvP they focus on. I want attractive characters, classes, and the option to make my own. I also want it to be pay to play. To me, that sounds like a damn good MMORPG. But those thoughts are my own. I would love to hear yours, because who knows? Maybe the person working on the next great MMO is reading comment sections like this one, searching for ideas. Now, if you're on the lookout for new MMOs because you're bored with what you're playing or what's available, consider checking out one of the 2 videos on screen right now. They might be able to help.